Welcome back, modeling friends. Let's get into another build video. This one is about the 72nd scale IL-2 from Tamiya, a great little kit with exquisite detail and fantastic fit overall. The IL-2, in my opinion, is such an iconic aircraft that every propeller World War II not needs it on their collection. Regardless of all of its initial flaws, this massive bird kept on flying until the end of the war and was a menace to the Germans. I did start this kit roughly 2 years ago, but due to some bad vibes with the P51D that I've been building right before this one, which basically became a trash can filler right at the end of the build, I decided to put Tamiya on hold, do something else. I guess I just didn't have the courage to go on at that point. So the first few minutes are from the past, me doing the unboxing and closing the landing gear doors, and the rest is, well, the future. The kit comes with one instruction, one quick history guide about how the pilots were conducting their ground attack runs, the usual Tamiya tech tips, 4 sprues worth of goodness, and 1 sprue of clear parts, and 1 sheet of fantastic decals. As you can see, the detailing is fantastic overall. So much so that I was worried at first losing some of the fine detail to the layers of paints that I'm going to put on. Luckily that wasn't the case. The rocket and the bomb stabilizers are on the thick side a bit, and sadly the exhausts aren't hollow, but that's understandable as they are quite thin and haven't been slide molded. On the plus side, the tires have nice texture on them. The clear parts are of superb quality. The canopy frame detail stands out very well. For those who want to build with the canopies open, it is going to be disappointing as there is no option for that. Decals are nice and crisp, but as usual with Tamiya, they are a bit on the thick side and there aren't too many stencil decals either. So this is the only work I did back in the day, which consists usually about me fiddling around with the landing gear base, seeing how easy it is to have them closed. Now there is no support for this out of the box, but luckily it wasn't too hard as the kit is very accurate and the doors fit very nicely into their place. Finally, we have arrived in the present time, where I mask off the windows behind the pilot. And here you can see me priming the cockpit parts with Mission Model's grey primer. I really like these Mission Model primers. They are not as tough as, for example, Ammo One Shot, but I quite like the surface finish of it and how quick it dries. Also, leaving it fully cured for a day, you can even go over it with enamel paints like AK Extreme Metal and it won't even bat an eye. Next up, I use the AK 3rd Gen acrylic interior steel grey. The fuel tank, which is housed between the pilot and the gunner, gets a treatment of black from an AK. The pilot seat, the control stick and the cockpit floor is painted with ammo's interior green. I saw this color mix of grey and green in the cockpit from some reference images. Not that it matters that much, as you won't see a thing when it's done. The inner wall of the fuselage is quite clear of detail, but I do give it a dash of primer and interior grey. Now for some cockpit detailing. There isn't much to do as most of the things are black, a bit of red and some white. Here I use a bit of metal aluminum from ammo on the fuel tanks, bands and cap. After covering everything with a satin varnish from Mission Models, I apply the instrument panel decals. I would advise to cut it up into 3 pieces, as there is a lever in the way which will make things harder. Now we give a generous amount of panel liner wash to all of the surfaces. After roughly half an hour, we rub off the excess with a dry cotton pad. If there are any more stubborn parts, one can use a small amount of mineral spirit to get the paint moving again. I do try to keep a good amount of wash on for some staining effect. It does help to give a more realistic look to the surface. Finally, the assembly can continue. There is an ugly line in the bottom of the gunner position, but the gun itself and the gunner figure will obscure it anyway, so I didn't bother too much. Interestingly, with this kit, the cockpit doesn't have to be glued in during the assembly of the fuselage halves. You can just slide it in from the bottom when everything is ready. The two halves went together without a problem. Do keep an eye out for the tail landing wheel. I almost forgot to glue it in, and you couldn't just slot it in after you glued the fuselage together. As you can see here, the cockpit fits into its place without a problem. For me so far, this was one of the easiest cockpits I had the fortune to assemble. Because I'm building the version fighting over Leningrad in 1944, I had to do some changes on the wings for the different cannons to fit. Usually I like to build models right out of the box without any third-party upgrades, but I really got used to replacing cannon barrels and pitot tubes with brass ones from Albion alloys. These are much nicer now, in my opinion. Here I glue in the landing gear bay and give an extra dab of sprue glue to the machine gun barrels on the inside. I do want to have this bird with all the ordnance it can carry, so I drill out all the holes for the rockets on the underside of the wings. The wings went together without any problem. After the wings got assembled, I've added the cannons. After taking some measurements, I've cut out the replacement barrels from Albion Alloys brass rods. Now comes the tricky part, cutting off the plastic barrels and drilling a hole in the center for the new ones and gluing them in with super glue. I left the drilling after I glued the parts on the wings so I have a better grip on them, as the parts are really tiny. After the cannons were done, I moved on to glue together the landing gear and glue it into the bay. As you can see, there is not much option for it to be closed, so I just eyeballed it roughly and hoped for the best. Based on some images I found on the internet, and of course having War Thunder as well for a bit of a reference how the landing gears look when they are closed, this should be realistic enough, for me at least. And lastly, I just gave it a bit of black primer. Finishing up the middle wing section, the radiator parts were a bit finicky but manageable. Again, I can only praise Tamiya for this, but really the fit between all the wing parts in the end was superb and there were no issues at all. The frontal gear bay bulges on the wing should have connected to the landing gear struts, but as they weren't there, their positioning wasn't that easy. After test fitting the wings and the fuselage together, I determined the place where the hole for the stand should go. Avoiding damaging the cockpit from below, I drilled a hole where the fuel tank is, as that has an open bottom. And of course, if you're interested in my stand, then follow the links in the description below. You can get it either from my own website or from my Etsy shop. Now that the hole drilling is out of the way, I can finally assemble the main body. This little guy just can't wait for takeoff. I glued his bum to the seat with this clear drying glue. Whilst the pilot's bum was drying, I masked off the canopies with thin strips of masking tape along the frame and masking liquid to fill in the middle. I also replaced the pitted tube with brass ones. Then went over all these metal parts with Mr. Metal Primer. This is necessary as the paint could flake off from bare metal. Before priming the whole model, I went over the canopy with interior steel grey from the outside. After priming with Mission Model's grey primer, I thought I'd try something different than the usual panel and pre-shading and use the mottling stencil from Ushi van der Rosten together with Mission Model's flat white to give a bit of texture to the surface. And here are the results. It looks quite interesting, but in the end not much comes through the paint job that goes on top of it. Perhaps next time I should use a more stark contrast color like black base and a more heavy-handed white mottling. Following the rule to paint from the lightest to the darkest color, I sprayed the underside with AK 3rd Gen AMT7 light blue. I decided to freehand the camouflage pattern and to try and keep the pre-shading underneath as much as possible by keeping each color separate. So first I paint all the light brown parts with AK 3rd Gen Splitter Master base. Next up are the green parts with AK's 3rd Gen AMT4 green. I quite like these paints from AK. They have nice coverage, easy to paint with a brush or an airbrush, and they are tough as nails. With freehanding, I try to go as low as possible with the PSI and thin the paint as much as I can. I did have tip dry quite often, but in the end that's something really hard to avoid with water-based acrylics, and certainly I need more experience with these ones. And lastly, I paint the dark parts with AK 3rd Gen AMT12 dark grey. After finishing the paint session, I also decided to paint on the yellow stripe on the tail instead of using the decals. Sadly they came out a bit misaligned, but I will try to live with it. Having the paint sealed with Mission Model satin varnish, I go into the decaling phase using Microsol and Microset and a dry cotton bud to push down these thick Tamiya decals and to help them conform the surface. The discoloration of the paint from the microset looks nasty, but don't worry, it will go away as it dries up again. Now some of the decals needed a bit more convincing to get into the panel lines, so with a fresh blade I cut them along the lines and softened them up with Microsol afterwards. After I finished with the decaling, I painted all the wheels with dark grey. Next up is the panel lining step. Now here I do like to go really heavy-handed with the enamel panel liner and use it as a filter as well. And of course, before I started to do this, I did seal the decals in with Mission Model satin varnish. Waiting for half an hour should be enough for most enamel paints to dry. After that, I went over with some dry cotton buds to rub off the excess. Keep on doing this until you're satisfied with the results, but make sure not to rub out the paint from the panel lines and recesses. And of course, if you come across some stubborn parts, just use some mineral spirits or enamel thinners to get it off. Now that I'm doing the underside, here you can see better how much I actually use. If you like to give your planes the grimy, dirty look, making it really look like the warplane that has been through some action, this is a good quick way to get that effect. Whilst leaving the enamels to rest for a day, I painted up the bombs and rockets with black primer, used matte aluminum for the bomb frames and brass for the bomb and rocket tips. For the exhaust, I base painted it with copper and then heavily weathered it with rust pigments afterwards. It's pretty unconventional to use copper on it, but I was satisfied with the results. The propellers were painted black and the cap got the split master base and flat white on top. Next up, I glue all the ordnance with super glue in place. Afterwards, I give them a bit of light grey enamel wash with the usual drying for half an hour plus cotton bud technique. I use the same wash to lighten the tires a bit. And here comes the dry cotton bud. Now let's finally put in the gunner. His friend the pilot has been waiting quite a while now. Now let's close him up so he can't jump out from the airplane during an emergency. Now I'm adding the finishing touches to the props with the same enamel wash I used on the top of the plane. And adding some light chipping with Ammo's Metaluminum. Well, this is all she wrote. Sorry for not including all the steps like using earth tone pigments for weathering the landing gears, the exhaust, rockets, and gun stains with ammo shaders and the Tamiya weathering master set for the mud stains on the wing roots. But this video got quite long as it is, and also some of the recording wasn't that good in quality, so I just decided not to use them. So what's the verdict? It is a nice kit with great fit and a lot of detail, as I said in the beginning. It was a joy to build and I wish I would have done it sooner. You can find links in the description for my in-flight stands, some high resolution images of the model and even more. Also, if you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe as there will be more in the near future. And as always, see you on the next one.